Styling in Webflow will never be the same after this update. In this video, we'll have a deep dive about custom properties, where and how you can use them in real-world projects. We'll talk about text wrap, how you can make text fluid and responsive, but at the same time accessible. We'll talk about clamp, calc, vertical text, and a bunch of other properties that you can use now in Webflow. And at the end, I'll tell you about the things that we still can't, which is important. For the start, let's talk about text wrap pretty and balance. So as you see here, we have this paragraph, and at the end we have this word sitting alone. Generally in design, we don't want this, and we call this an orphan word, and we want to prevent it from happening. What we can do now is, on our style panel, we can scroll all the way down, and here we see custom properties. For this one, we can say text wrap, and then we add pretty. So what it does, it just makes sure that there is no word sitting alone at the end of the paragraph. But something even better we can do is text wrap balance. So if we add balance, you see it balances the entire paragraph. This is pretty useful, and I can see myself using it in all types of projects. If you want to know more about each one of these properties, you can hover over the property and then just read the documentation. Additionally, you can always search for something called "can I use," and then just use the property you want. In this case, text wrap balance. You'll see this website, "can I use?" And here on this website, you see the support of the property you are trying to use. Not all custom properties are supported on every browser, and you see that here. You see if somebody using Safari on iOS, they won't be able to see text wrap balance. Next we want to talk about is container queries, and I'll show you in an example how we can use it, but first I need to explain. So here we have this text, its size is 6 rem, and if we make the screen smaller or bigger, the text stays the same. It's a fixed size, 6 rem. But how can we make it respond to the size change? How can we make it fluid? Here we can say, instead of 6 rem, something like 9 VUW. That's based on viewport, and as the viewport gets smaller and bigger, the text also scales. But this has a few issues. For example, on smaller screens, the text can get too small, and on bigger screens, the text can get infinitely big. There is no max size here. But with container queries, we can set that. So Webflow is using media queries, and media queries are basically looking at the entire width of our screen, the browser's window, and we can adjust the size of different elements based on that size. Here, for example, on tablet, we can say anything between 900 and 600, whatever. We define numbers, and between those numbers, we adjust styles. With container queries, we can do something very similar, but instead of looking at the entire browser size for the reference, we look at a container, a div block, which we can set. So in order to do that, we have the text inside of a div block, and this div block has a max width of, in this case, 80 rems. And what we want to do here is to make sure that the text scales only inside of that container and not outside of it. So to do that, we select the container that we want to set, and here we say container type inline size. Now by doing so, we have that div block as our container. Let me give it a border so you see it better. And now we have to go to the text, and here we have to set the size of the text based on that container that we defined. And to do that, we have to go to the custom property, which we can access from here as well. And here we say something like 10 CQW, which stands for container query width. We enter, and now let's see what happens. If I make my screen smaller, the text gets smaller. But if we go to preview, the text, as you see, will never get bigger. So by that, we just prevent the text from growing infinitely big without the use of media queries and a bunch of custom code, which we had to do in the past. This is especially useful for bigger text, and I can see myself using it all the time. The next one we want to talk about is text clamp. To explain clamp, let's have a look at this paragraph again, and let's say we want to make this text a bit fluid. Let's say we want to scale it based on the browser window, but we do not want the text to get smaller than, let's say, 14 pixels, and we never want the text to get too big, let's say bigger than 2 rems. So to do that, we can use something called clamp. So here we come to the size of the text, custom property, and here we say clamp. And then inside of parentheses, we use 3 values. The first one is our minimum. So we say 14 pixels is the absolute minimum we can accept. And then we say we want it to be something like 2 view W. So it's going to be fluid. But then we also want to set a maximum. We want the text to never get bigger than 2 rem. We close it, and now we have a clamp. If we make the browser window smaller and bigger, you see the text also is scaling, but it will never get smaller than 14 pixels, which was a problem if you would use ViewW by itself just alone. And you also know it will never grow bigger than 2 rems. This is more useful, I would say, for smaller text, and for bigger text I will still stick to container queries. The next on our list is Calc, with which we can do simple calculations. I'll show you 2 examples on where it can get really helpful. So here we have this hero section with a height of 100 VH. We do this all the time. We want the above the fold of our website, essentially the hero section and the navigation, to take 100% of the height. But doing this, setting section hero to 100 VH, we see that some of it is outside of the view. But why? Well, because the nav bar is taking some height and it's pushing that 100 VH down. So what we want to do logically is to say, hey, we want this 100 VH minus whatever height this nav bar has. But how do we know the height of this nav bar? So here's a fun Webflow trick. By clicking inside of the height, we can press arrow up or down. And by doing that, Webflow just tells us the height, so 72 pixels. Now we know we need to subtract this 100. We need to subtract 72 pixels from this 100. So we go to custom again, and here we say Calc. Inside of parentheses, we say 100 VH minus 72 pixels. We close it, and now you see it's perfect. So this way, the hero section and nav bar are taking 100% of our viewport height. But we can take this a bit further and make it a bit more, let's say, automatic or smart. So for the height of nav bar, we had this 72 pixels, but what we can do is we can actually use a variable, and then we can go to our variables, copy that variable name, go to hero section, and here instead of 72 pixels, we just paste that variable. You see, it's still the same result, but if we ever change that variable, everything changes, so we don't have to do that manually. The next place I want to show you Calc is in Flexbox. So right now we have these 2 components inside of a Flexbox, and the 2 children are taking 47% each. Why 47? Why not 50? That's normally what we want to do. So let's do 50. But now you see that children is growing out of the Flexbox. Why? Because of the gap. There is some gap in between. So you see the gap is 3 rem. And because of this 3 rem, this one is getting pushed out by 3 rems. Now, how can we solve this? With Calc, we can say, instead of 50%, let's do 50% minus what's between them. So we go to custom properties, we say Calc again, and then we do 50% minus not 3 rems, but half of that much, because it's between them. So it's divided by 2. So we can directly say 1.5 rems, or we can say 3 rem divided by 2, or we can go even one step further and use the variable and then take the entire variable and divide that by 2. So now the calculation is happening 50% of the width of that flexbox minus the gap in between them divided by 2. And now you see our flexbox and the children will perfectly. All right, the next one I want to touch on briefly is vertical text. So let's have a look at this text here. I already have it set to vertical. You see we have writing mode vertical RL. What is this RL? Let's explore this. So let's make the text width to be something bigger. And at first I thought this RL might be for the direction of the text, where how it's written, but no, it's not for that. If we do LR, you see it just left to right. It's basically inside of the box that it's contained in, and now you know what it is for. All right, so now let's remove this and go to the next one, which is about user select and events none. So what are these? We have this text here and also this one here. Let's select this one and go to events and we say select none. And we also see this here in the Webflow navigation that we cannot click on this element anymore. It's not selectable. But if we go to the published version of the site, this text, even though it's not clickable, it's selectable actually. So it makes the text only non-interactable for mouse click, but it's still selectable. If you want to make the text completely unselectable, as you see, I cannot select this text. Here, how we can do it. We can say user select none. This way it cannot be selected, as simple as that. All right, now let's talk about the last one on our list, which is ellipsis. How can we cut off text with that ... at the end of it? So Webflow now supports this, but with a catch. So let's see. Here we have this nano sofa with this fancy description, which we want to cut off. This is especially useful if you do blogs and you have blog cards and sometimes you want to cut off some of the excerpt with ... You can do it this way. So here what we want to do is to say text overflow, and here we want to say ellipsis, and by doing this you see nothing happens because we need to do a few other things. So in order to force this to be cut off, we want to prevent it from breaking, from wrapping. Yeah, so no wrap. And then what we want to do is set the overflow to none and then give it a max width. If it doesn't have a max width, it will never know. So to give it a max width, we can say something like 20 characters. And now you see, if I also change this, you see it will be cut off at that point with ... at the end. Now, this has a small issue, a limitation, which is we can just do one line, not more than one. If we want to do more than one line, we still need to do custom code because Webflow still does not support it. So let's remove this actually, and also remove the breaking. So we have the text, but let's keep the overflow and max width. And what we can do here, I already have it all written. I just need to add the dot back so the class works. What we have here, we have display WebKit box and then line clamp. This is the number of lines we want to clamp to, and then vertical. If I save and close, you see it limits it to 2 lines, as simple as that. It works just like that, but Webflow does not support those properties. Why? Because WebKit, when we see WebKit, it's not like standard CSS. It's not accepted by all browsers. That's why probably Webflow is never gonna support all of these, even though they support some WebKit, but not all of them. Which brings me to the next thing that Webflow does not support, which is a bit disappointing to me, because I really want this to be supported. It's important. I mean, it is literally important. So to show you that, here we can add any custom property, let's say color, background color, and here we can say red. You see here we are overriding it. We're actually just using this property, but if we can't override it directly, which is the case sometimes, we have to use something called important. By doing that, we make sure that we override whatever styles coming before with this one. This is especially useful if we are dealing with, let's say, forms from HubSpot, where the styles are coming from the embed, and we cannot override them by directly trying to manipulate the CSS, where we need to use important. This is ugly code, I understand, but it's still pretty essential. I have to use it. It's not that I like it. So if you are listening Webflow, please add important. All right. In this video, you learned about text wrap, pretty, and balance to make your paragraphs nice. You also learned clamp, with which you can make your text more accessible, make sure it has some guides, it never gets too small or too big, but still follows your preferred value. We learned about Calc, which I see myself using all the time. I was using it already before these custom properties as a custom code. I used it in animation. Sometimes you want to make things really responsive on every device. Calc is your friend. It's for all the edge cases, not as something that you use as a standard. And we also touched on a few other properties, such as vertical text, which is pretty fun, with user select none, making your elements non-selectable at all. And we also talked about ellipsis, and I showed you 2 ways to make your text to go ... All right, this was it. Thank you everyone for watching. If there is any custom property that you want me to cover or explain you in the next video, comment them below. I'll consider making a video. Until the next one, take care. Peace.